These Violent Delights, Chapter 24. Juliet was clenching her fists. Open, closed, open, closed. Her hands were absolutely itching for something to do. Mostly they were begging to get a hold of the vial that Roma had tucked in his sleeve. Juliet hadn't asked for it. She wouldn't overstep her bounds that far and have him think she mistrusted him that much. But it was a true test of strength to keep her hands to herself and not attempt at snatching. "It's just around this corner," Roma assured, either oblivious to her internal turmoil or misinterpreting it. "We're nearly there." He spoke to her like she was a startled rabbit about to bolt. Juliet was antsy, but just because she was on Whiteflower territory didn't mean she was about to let herself be attacked. And the more Roma tried to be kind to her, the more her nose wrinkled. "You are more nervous than I am right now," Juliet commented. "I am not," Roma shot back. "I am simply a cautious person." "I don't recall you looking over your shoulder every second when you came into the Scarlet Burlesque Club." In fact, she recalled him looking rather confident, which had annoyed her immensely. Roma gave her a sidelong glance, narrowing his tired eyes. He needed a moment to find his answer, and then he did. He simply muttered, "Times have changed." They have indeed. Starting from the mere fact that Roma and Juliet were walking side by side, and yet Juliet's arms were casually swinging, positioned far from her weapons. When they turned the corner, Juliet immediately spotted the research facility Roma had described. Among the row of buildings, it was the only one more silver-toned than brown, bearing metal platings that shone under the moonlight, where others, constructed of plaster or wood, only glowed dully. She took her time admiring the sight, but Roma ran up to the door quickly, long accustomed to the appearance of such detailing. "Did you fund this?" Juliet asked. She eyed the fancy lock that Roma was twirling around. His eyes were focused on the rapidly spinning numbers that appeared above the panel, moving the dial into the hundreds before dropping back to 51, 50, 49. Though the inside of the glass-paned doors were dark, she could make out a long hallway and one sole door that gleamed with light. "I did not," Roma replied. A heavy sigh from Juliet. "Did the White Flowers fund this place? You wet blanket?" The lock clicked. Roma pulled the door open and signaled for Juliet to go ahead. "Indeed." Juliet nodded. There was some surprise, some acknowledgement, and just the smallest hint of approval in that small jerk of her head. The Scarlet Gang would never fund something like this. She assumed the White Flowers probably tested their products here, making sure that the drugs were traded were that the merchants said they were. But with technology like this, there were infinite possibilities in research and innovation. The Chinese were still very much people of the past. They emphasized classical text and poetry over science, and it showed, in the dingy, cramped basements that the Scarlet drug testers were placed in the thousands of poems Juliet had been given to memorize before she was taught the basics of natural selection. She looked up at the neatly placed electric lights, all currently extinguished into darkness. Even while swathed in shadow, she could pick out the unblemished lines in the ceiling, the bulbs that were undoubtedly polished by cleaners every weekend on the clock. "Lawrence, let me in." The hallway suddenly lit up, but not from the bulbs. The one door that had been brimming with light had opened. "Здравствуйте, Lawrence bellowed, sticking his head out in his greeting. He faltered upon seeing Juliet. Ni hao?" His confusion was almost endearing. "You don't have to switch, sir," she said in Russian, walking toward the lab. Internally, Juliet quickly ran through the possibilities of his accent. "But we can speak Dutch if you like." "Oh, that's not necessary," Lawrence said. The wrinkles near his eyes crinkled deeply in amusement. He had never looked so charmed. Poor Roma here would feel terribly left out. Roma pulled a face. "Excuse me, He stopped. He turned to the doorway, appearing to be listening hard. "Is somebody coming?" Indeed, in that moment, two figures burst through the doorway, carrying between them a prone form, an unconscious woman in a nationalist uniform. Benedict Montagov blinked in bewilderment, taken aback to see Juliet standing mere meters away from his cousin. Marshal Seho only snorted, waving his hand for them to move aside so they could enter the lab. It was after hours now. The work tables had been cleared and emptied, wiped down and polished to ready a nice spacious surface, that the Nationalist could be set down upon. As soon as she was placed upon the table, her body stilled, but her hair rustled about, sections of her scalp twitching. Juliet pressed her hand to her mouth. Her eyes tracked the dots of blood marring the Nationalist's cheek. Each crescent moon had seemed to be the result of sharp nails. This woman was infected with the madness, but she was not dead yet. "Sorry to barge in," Marshal Sejo said. He sounded a little too proud of himself to be truly apologetic. "Are we interrupting anything?" Roma placed his vial down on another work table. The blue of its liquid glistened under the glaring white light. "Only the answer to whether the larkspur really made a true vaccine, but it can wait," he said. "Laurens, you wanted to run tests on a live victim of the madness, yes?" "Certainly, but—" Laurens gestured to Juliet. "There's a lady in the room." "The lady is interested in seeing you run your tests, please," Juliet said. With the exception of her brief surprise upon her first sighting of the Nationalist, it would not have been impossible to find any sort of shock from Juliet. She spoke if she were an everyday occurrence. Laurens blew out a breath. He wiped his brow, his movements slow, even while the world around him sped up in the appearance of this dying Nationalist. "Very well, then. Let us see if we can find a cure." He began. Juliet watched in fascination as the scientist hauled out a box and retrieved its contents, filling the lab with equipment and machinery more fitting for a hospital than a drug testing facility. Laurens took blood samples and tissue samples and, with his lips thinned, he even took hair follicles from the Nationalist on the table, putting them under a microscope and jotting notes at record speed. Juliet folded her arms and tapped her foot, ignoring the whispering between the 3 white flowers on the other side of the room. Her ears could begin to burn if she listened in. She didn't know what other topic could possibly engross them so much, would prompt Roma to gesture wildly with his hands as he hissed in low tones to his 2 friends. "This is unfortunate," Romans remarked rapidly, reeled back in the attention of the 3 in the corner. "What did you find?" Roma asked, breaking away from his friends. "That is the very problem," Laurens replied. "Nothing. Even from advanced equipment, I see nothing that the doctors across Shanghai didn't already see. There is nothing about this woman's vitals that would suggest infection of any kind." Juliet frowned, then leaned on the table behind her, remaining silent. Marshall demanded, "Then there is no way to cure the madness?" "Impossible," Roma countered immediately. For his sanity, he had to believe that the cure existed. He could not allow himself to entertain the notion of a doomed investigation, of Elisa never waking up. "Perhaps it is not there is no cure," Benedict added, speaking more evenly. His words were all enunciated to the cleanest degree, like he had practiced the sentence in his head before he spoke it aloud. "You said that this madness was somebody's creation after all. If there is a cure, it is not for us to see. If there is a cure, only whoever engineered the madness has the instruction." Laurens pulled off his gloves. The machines around him were humming at different pitches, filling the lab with an almost musical air. "Too many factors," Laurens said. "Too many secrets, too much information we don't have. It would be absurd to try attempting it." "You haven't tried anything yet," Juliet said. Every pair of eyes in the room, those who were conscious anyway, turned to look at her. Juliet lifted her chin. "You took her blood, looked at her skin. It's all too human, too bodily." Juliet walked toward the unconscious Nationalist, peered down at this entirety of flesh, a vessel for life that had been altered. "This madness is not natural. Why try to engineer a cure the natural way? Slice her head open, pull the insects out." "Juliet," Roma chided. "That's—" Laurens was already picking up a scalpel, shrugging unceremoniously. "Wait," Benedict said. "Last time—" The tip of the blade sank into the Nationalist's scalp. Laurens pulled gently on only a small section of her hair to make a parting and clear space to extract an insect. The Nationalist spasmed viciously. The entire table rocked, and Juliet didn't know if it had shifted seriously enough to make a terrible creaking noise, or if that was actually her ragged gasp that echoed through the room. 1 second the woman on the table could have rivaled the dead. The next she was writhing, her hand clutched to her chest and her legs rigidly straight. Her eyes remained closed. The only way she could tell that she was when she was dead was when her hand fell from her chest and swung down to the table, waving back and forth like a heavy pendulum. Her hair once again stirred. This time it was not just the insects settling. They were leaving, some streaming down her neck in little lines of black, hurrying down her body in a mass evacuation with such order that they resembled a dark fluid. Others flew wide, springing out with no warning whatsoever to latch on whatever was nearest. For 2 insects, the nearest host was Lauren's beard. The landing happened in slow motion to Juliet's eyes, but Roma was already moving. By the time she had registered the horror of what it meant to see 2 little black specks disappearing into the tufts of white, Roma had already had a knife in his hand. By the time she even thought to call out a warning, Roma took out the knife and sheared through Lauren's beard as close as he dared to get to skin, flinging the white hairs to the ground. They waited. The machines had gone to sleep. Now the labs were filled with heavy breathing. They waited. 2 insects surged from the clump of hair on the ground. Roma stomped down hard, crushing them without mercy. 100 more insects had been released into the night when they shot through the crack underneath the lab floor before anyone could stop them. But at least killing 2 out of the thousands was better than killing none. Lawrence touched his bare chin. His wrinkled eyes were pulled uncharacteristically wide. "Well," Lawrence said. "Thank you, Roma. Let's move on to the vaccine you brought me, then, shall we?"